last video, we looked at a little bit about how Camus approaches overall this question of how do you respond to the absurdity of your existence, right? And we saw that what he wants to do is look at the premises here, your call to find meaning, your rational demand to unify yourself with the rest of the world, and the world, on the other hand, resistance. That's the other premise. The world's resistance, the world's silence, the world's turning away from that demand of yours, not giving you an answer. So we looked at that, and I said in this next video here, we'll look at his answer for then what comes out of that. How does he actually draw a response out of that? But first, what we're going to do is talk about what he thinks are inadequate responses to the absurdity of your existence. Why, for instance, resignation, suicide won't do. Why, for instance, an appeal to a higher power won't do as well. And before we even get to those arguments, what I'd like to do is say a little bit more too about this, what Camus calls the silence of the universe. Because I think right now we find ourselves in a moment where this silence might be especially felt, where it might be especially present in our lives. We look around, right, and we see the world shutting down around us. The storefronts closed and locked up. Our friends, maybe even our family, forced to stand at a distance, in the distance of these unknowns. The streets emptied of all this coming and going we're so used to. The intersections where our lives have crossed with less and less of ourselves in them. These spaces, these silences that we face, Camus will say, ultimately, when we face our own mortality, when we face our own meaning here, when we face this question of the meaning of life, that silence, that quiet, that emptiness that the universe has in its response to us. Now you might say, Camus, and I might argue with you, look, the world is not silent. And there's no silence here at all. I mean, it's buzzing and humming along. All you have to do is just turn on your phone, power up your laptop, right? Put your TV on, and there's plenty of noise out there. There are plenty of voices crying out, plenty of voices laughing, shouting at one another, praying, plenty of voices offering explanations. All those sounds out there, they're really at your fingertips. Just turn on your device, whichever one it may be, and you can hear it. You can hear everyone speaking at once, everyone telling you what should be done, what you should do with your life, right? All those answers offered up by all those people trying to give us explanations of how things are in the world, how we might live better, how we might figure things out, to come follow them for understanding, that the answers are there, and it's just a matter of how we see the world. So, Camus, we might say there's not a silence here at all. Maybe we have a cacophony. Maybe we have too much noise. Noise upon noise upon noise. All these voices clashing together. All these voices drowning one another out. And I think that's what Camus would point to. Because ultimately you can't hear anything clearly. There is too much. There are too many reasons. There are too many explanations out there. There are too many who appear to know this or appear to know that. That would have us follow them to some understanding that would help us along. All of these schools of thought, all of our sciences, all of our religions, all of our gods, our cultures, even all of our different kinds of atheists. Right? Here you have many, many offerings for how the world is, how we fit in. But we don't have anything like certainty. In fact, when we step back and we say, okay, here is something I can believe. Here is something I might, be drawn to. Here is something that might give me some answers. We, if we're honest with ourselves, see a gap between those explanations, those reasons, and what we can really be certain about. Remember, for Camus, what we can be really certain about is we live and die, and in between we struggle to find meaning. And for all of our knowledge, and for all of our faith, and for all of our religions, there is a space between them and what we can be truly certain about. A space so large, a gap so immense, an abyss really, so large that Camus would say that is the silence. That is the silence he's talking about, the silence of the universe. It's the silence that we wrestle with as we try to figure out the meaning and the worth of our lives. So I wanted to just address that a bit more because I don't know if I've treated that silence thoroughly enough in the videos before. We've talked mainly about our call for understanding, but for Camus there is also then that silence there. And it might even be the silence of all these voices that offer explanations, drowning one another out, and you can't quite hear anything for certain. So what then does he say about responding to the universe? And let me also say this. As we go forward here, what I've done is split these videos into two because I realize there's a bit too much to just cover in one last video here. So I want to cover how he argues against suicide and against this notion that there is a higher power that would you can put your faith in to resolve these issues for you. And then the next video will talk about how he thinks we should respond to our condition. So right, that question, well, what now, right? That's what interests him, that hour of consciousness. What do we do now? And he says, let's consider suicide here, the most urgent question we can ask ourselves, that complete resignation that we might end up falling prey to. So, you might come to a place in your life, whether from pain, suffering, from loneliness, from fear, from disappointment, from a sense of failure or excess, even from maybe weariness and dullness in your life, or boredom, right? Schopenhauer is boredom. From wanting to want something. Wherever it comes from, you come to a place in life and maybe you say, I don't know what to do with myself anymore. I don't know what to do with the world anymore. I don't know what I have to do with the world anymore, or what the world has to do with me. You come to a desperate place sometimes. And this, for Camus is the question of meaning. That's what's happening here, felt to its fullest. The question of meaning, an expression of that desperate demand to unify yourself with the world. That's what's happening here. But it doesn't think resignation is the answer. Resignation doesn't follow from your condition. So if we borrow some insight from Joshua Foa Dienstag, who in his book Pessimism, Philosophy, Ethic, Spirit, he helps us think a little bit about what Camus argues against here. He says, Camus argues against suicide because suicide for him is not so much a judgment against life as an abdication of judgment. Suicide attempts to do away with the problem by eliminating the value of the mind, that is the thinking being, man. But the mind, right, our human inquiry, is the very source of this absurd, at least one of the main elements, one of the premises, right? If we think back about how we structured this, we said Camus is looking to draw out how we respond to the absurdity of our existence from the very conditions that make it up, from those premises. So if we were to resign ourselves completely, what we would be doing essentially is canceling out, rejecting one of the premises, not really drawing a response from them, but denying the premise itself. We'd be, in this case, for instance, denying that all men are mortal. So that's not a conclusion you draw from the premises. That is simply just denying the premise. And so what would this look like then in terms of the question of the meaning of our lives or the worth of our lives here? Camus says suicide would deny our very nature as rational beings. It would deny our demand for meaning, our passion to unify ourselves with the world beyond us. That suicide would stop us short of exhausting the resources within us, our reason, our creativity, our immense passion to try to form and shape and define ourselves. All of this would be denied if we were to succumb to this approach. So he thinks this response, it doesn't follow from the absurd. It denies one of the conditions, us, our human being, to begin with. So complete resignation, suicide won't do. Well, what about faith in a higher power? So maybe you come to a place in life where you drop to your knees, you bow your head, and you say, God has an explanation, even if I don't. God has some meaning for all this. He has a reason. It's God that unifies all things. So what's happening here? Camus says what's happening, and if you remember these elements here, right? Those two components, those two vital premises, as I've been referring to them. The human call for understanding and the silence of the world. That's what makes up the absurd. Well, what's happening here, Camus says, is there's a third being that enters the picture. God, this transcendent being, this supernatural power, this higher power, that would give you that explanation, give you that understanding, give you that meaning that you've been searching for. Maybe you can't comprehend it yourself, but you feel that it's there, right? But Camus says this does not follow from the two premises, and this is how we started out, right? We're drawing out a response from those two premises. Your human inquiry into your own meaning and the silence of the universe. Those are the two premises. It doesn't follow from that. In fact, what it does is it rests on this hope that you bring in this third being. You posit this third being out there that exists beyond you and the world. A third being that would somehow unify you and the world. And it's a hope. And you stake the meaning and the worth of your life on this hope, Camus says, not on what is certain about your life. He says in the myth of Sisyphus, I don't know whether this world has a meaning that transcends it, but I know that I do not know that meaning, and that it is impossible for me just now to know it. What can a meaning outside my condition mean to me? I can understand only in human terms what I can touch, what resists me. That is what I understand. These two certainties, right? And these are the premises. These are those conditions that will make up the absurd. Your appetite for the absolute and for the unity and on the other hand, the impossibility of reducing this world to a rational and reasonable principle. Those are the two premises. The appetite for the absolute and for unity, and the impossibility of reducing this world to a rational and reasonable principle. I also know that I cannot reconcile these two things, right? That's what's certain. What other truth can I admit without lying, he says, without bringing in a hope that I lack? How can I be honest with myself, right, in answering this question of my condition? And which means, he says, this hope, which means nothing within the limits of that condition that I live. So human terms, if we emphasize here for Camus, is to find the worth of life in what is drawn from one's very experience of this life. It's to have no illusions whatsoever about your condition, to not imagine or dream up any other being out there that would somehow resolve this for you, to engage simply and clearly with what is in front of your own eyes, to demand of yourself to live solely within what you know, to accommodate yourself to what you are, and to bring in nothing that is not certain, he says. So, these are the human terms which he seeks to try to answer this question of our condition. How do we respond to it? So for him, faith in a higher power will not do. Revolt, this question of revolt, or this, I should say, answer of revolt, this way to respond, is for him what is going to be the most honest, the most rational way we can address our own condition. It is, again, the way in which we become the absurd hero of our own lives. So next video, video B, if you will, of this segment, of this video, last segment 5, I'll cover what that revolt means for Camus.